welcoming back to another episode of Net Positive, where we help you to transform your eco-anxiety into action through regeneration and resilience. And in today's conversation here, we're with Drew Lavine and Scott Kelly. And hi, Drew, and hi, Scott. It's really great to have this conversation and every other conversation we've had in the past. And welcome back to a fancy new episode of Net Positive.
We've had a lot of really good conversations over the years, and I really do appreciate them, Richard.
I've gotten to learn a ton from you guys, and it's been personally fulfilling. Having this conversation here is very fulfilling. And I was telling Scott a little earlier, I actually don't know all of the story about you two. And so I'm really curious if your pathways here were direct. Did you just wake up one morning and decide that you're going to transform the world for good? Tell me about like that early days along your path. Well, tell me about before you knew each other.
Yeah. For me, it was like waking up one day. I had traveled across this beautiful country of ours a few times. And on my, let's say it might have been my second or third trip, I had enough time between the trips. And literally one day I woke up and realized some of the places that I love the most, I had seen so much degradation so quickly that I did wake up one day and I was like, I can't practice architecture doing this, what I see happening. And that was a transformational moment for me. And I came back to Philadelphia and was like, I'm going to do things differently.
That's a lot of self-awareness there to take action or take on a big mission there.
Yeah, I think it's fundamentally because I'm an environmentalist first, who practices architecture, who tries to practice it in a socially responsible, restorative way. And I just can't do it any other way. Our profession shouldn't do it any other way. We're not there yet. We're still fighting to make that a little more of the commonplace.
Are you finding your work has started to cure some of that
Yeah.
desire for change?
Yeah, and that's actually something I really appreciate. There was a period in my life where I really didn't love going to work every day. It's like, I got to do it because that's what we do in society. We wake up Monday through Friday, we go to work, and we put in our 8 hours or 9 hours, or in my profession, 12, and that's what we do. And that really wasn't cutting it for me. And now I'm at the place which I'm very happy about, which I get up in the morning, and it was 6:30 this morning, and I got up before my alarm, and I was like, all right, I'm ready to go to work. And that is super fulfilling.
And pretty special and rare too.
My psychiatrist thinks so.
Are you
Yeah,
referring to me?
a lot of times, well, that's a lot about what a partnership is about.
Well, I saw your partner there warming up his answer, Drew. Same question to you. Tell me what this looked like for you, even just early on in your life. Where has your self-awareness awoken, and tell me what this looks like through your eyes.
Yeah, so I mean, hindsight gives really good perspective on things like this. And interesting, because as I've asked myself this question in the past, I've always kind of, what I've come to conclude is this. I grew up in a small historic town in the Appalachian Mountains.
Okay.
Which was kind of at the intersection of the built environment and the natural environment. And then I went to college at Virginia Tech, which was a small town in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And after that, I started my architectural career in San Francisco. So again, I was in a city surrounded by an ecosystem. And then I ended up moving to Philadelphia. And similarly, as I got more involved in the architectural community in Philadelphia and also understanding kind of the natural resources of our region, it continued to kind of simmer in me this kind of balance point that I found myself in between the built environment and the natural environment. And this was all, I think, again, hindsight, right? This was all kind of simmering internally with me. And, as a young architect in Philadelphia, I was really feeling at the time that I was kind of butting up against the conventions of our practice and its relationship to sustainability. And again, this is going back, we're talking in the 2006 to 2008 years, where it's like we were still trying to advocate, like, can't we put LED lights in our projects, please? And meeting resistance on it. And so, the really pivotal thing that this kind of all culminated in on my end was I made a push. I advocated for myself with my employer at the time. I said, I really want to go in 2008. I really want to go to Greenbuild in Boston. I think this is important. And with some convincing, I got the approval to go. And at Greenbuild, I had the pleasure of listening to Bill McKibben talk. And Bill gave this amazing talk. It was right when he was starting 350.org. And I left that talk feeling like I have to do something, right? I can no longer just be an architect. I can no longer even just be an architect who wants to do and advocates for sustainability in my firm. I need to do something more than that. And so I came home from Greenbuild and I got into grassroots organizing with 350.org in Philadelphia and developed a local presence here and did some pretty big climate demonstrations in Philadelphia. And it really clarified for me that that my role in all of this was not to just do architecture. I had to do something more than that. And when I did decide, okay, it's time for me to pivot my career right in the middle of the recession, which was probably not an advisable time to do something like that. As fate would have it, it was the same time that Revision was looking for somebody. And so, um, after the longest job interview I've ever had in my life, which involved a coffee break and going to the bathroom and continuing the conversation, I ended up taking a job here. And, I think that, as they say, the rest is history. This was, I never had a bad day after that. I never had a bad day at work. So, that's kind of, how it happened.
Good thing your grandma gave you a good referral. That was a thorough background check.
Yep. Yep.
Well, and you work for a powerhouse organization when it comes to not only, so there's a bright distinction between sustainability, net zero, and the regeneration aspect. And your firm really leans into the regenerative side of things. Tell me a little bit about that transformation of thought across your practice, and then kind of, Drew, you've already alluded this, across the community at scale. And how do you continue, I see you as a beacon out there. How do you continue to be that beacon for others who are looking for the light?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would tie a lot of this back. I mean, when I started working at Revision, I kind of parachuted into a culture that was open.
Mm,
And it was a culture where there were not constraints on how you wanted to approach sustainability or how you wanted to weave it into your project, even when your clients didn't ask for it. And that was, a really kind of, for a moment for me at the time as an architect to be like, you mean I can do this even if my clients don't ask? Or even if, Scott, you don't tell me to do something, if I come to you and say, hey, I did some weird stuff here and there's a reason why, and that's okay, that is the kind of thing that culturally, I think, just sets up a different dynamic in terms of how you work. And from the very beginning here, I think the conversation has always been around doing more good, right? We've never been satisfied with the doing less bad paradigm, right? It's always been, how to move our work and our clients and our staff and our colleagues in the community, how to move everything in that direction, and not getting discouraged when it doesn't all happen at once. It's like we are not as dogmatic about sustainability as some people may think, right? We don't look at every building and say every single project needs to be a living building, because we know that we can't do that on every project and for every client. But if there are parts of every project that we can move in the doing more good direction and moving in a regenerative direction, then we're changing a little bit we're always changing in the right direction. We're learning, our clients are learning, it's shaping things moving forward. and it prepares us for when we do get those ones where it's like, okay, now we're all in. Yeah.
You always have to design a project to the available resources, whether it's nature or budget or the client's ability to think in a certain way. And we do try to do that. The idea of it all happening at once, that like there's been an evolution here. Last century, we were about doing less bad. We were really like, let's save some energy, let's save some water. And it took a while. It probably took about 5 years when we took on our first Living Building Challenge project. It might have been 2006. We realized that the Living Building Challenge was trying to do everything all at once. And it wasn't about trying to do it at 2030 or 2050. It was now. And when we reflected on that, we realized we've done many of the things in Living Building Challenge, but only on one project. We got zero energy on this one. We got zero water on this one. We had no toxicity on this one. Living Building Challenge made us push really hard and brought us from just being practicing sustainable designers to regenerative. Because we figured out that we could really do more than what was perceived could be done. So Living Building Challenge was a real instigator and really did help us change our practice to be more regenerative.
And I think one of the key parts of it also is recognizing, again, this is from our early work with Living Building Challenge, our role as advocates. And that, this is something that we have to do all the time, whether we're asked or not. And sometimes it's kind of like innocent advocacy, like, hey, why don't we try this? Even if the answer is no, okay, we're trying and we'll keep trying, right? But it's also building a culture of advocacy, and it always emerges in unexpected places here, and it makes me smile, right? Like I heard the other day about, one of the youngest members in our office got a call from a sales rep in the brick industry, and within a minute or two, he turned it around to the sales rep and was asking him about whether or not they're looking at human rights in the supply chain,
Wow.
right?
It's a big
And this is
conversation.
a big conversation for a young person to be having, and it's the kind of conversation that 20 years ago we were having. We were asking for recycled content, right? And it was the same kind of reaction that the manufacturers were giving us, and it just made me so happy when I heard about this person in our office doing this, because not only is it the right question to be asking, it is an intensely correct question to be asking right now, but for this person to have, so quickly kind of gained the confidence to do that in a professional environment, that's the culture that we're really trying to nurture with our staff, and that extends into our projects. So that's the kind of thing that we're trying to make happen, and that's the advocacy lever that we learned from Living Building Challenge.
How do you continue to tell that story, celebrate that story, not only internally with your morning stand-up meetings, but also like have that resonate? I think that there's a lot of agency and action there. I make no assumption of this person's age, but the picture in my mind is of us when we were younger and felt like that spark or felt that like age. I mean, you've told a story here, like I can make this change myself. I can ask this myself. That's a powerful moment. I still feel the power from that.
Yeah, I think that a lot of this comes down to, like when I was that age and I was developing my own kind of tools for how I would interview product reps, to try and understand, is this a sustainable product or not? That wasn't something that I was authorized to do, and quite frankly, I didn't know if I was ever going to tell my bosses about it, right? There were people in the company who I'd talk to about it because we were doing the work, but I think that the real key thing is you know, to build a culture where that level of innovation, and going out there and putting yourself on the line, um, where that is not only just accepted, but it's rewarded, and that we celebrate it, like you said. And I think a big part of it is getting out to answer your question, Richard, like how do we push this forward, right? Not just internally. I think the key thing is to have our people out in the community talking to other architects and other people in the AEC industry who might not feel that they have that same kind of freedom to do that. And it's to give them the confidence that, like, yeah, you should do this. This is your
Model that good behavior.
responsibility, right? And, just because someone doesn't tell you this is your task for the day doesn't mean you shouldn't do it if you know it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now more than ever, we need that, right? If we sit back for the next few years and just wait for people to authorize us to do things, we're not going to move forward. We need people to kind of do it on their own and take the initiative.
I think part of that is how we all run our businesses. Like, I think Drew and I, as business partners, we know our role is to support the other people in this firm who are pushing for innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why that individual felt so empowered to stand up and ask the right questions of the manufacturing rep. So our job is not to tell everybody what to do and demand that they do it our way. It's to see what is good in them, where their gifts are, and then support them the best that we can as a company. That's part of the reason we're a B corporation. That's part of the reason that we carry that just label.
Going from people to advocacy to materials, I think you're helping me see an arc here. How are you seeing the market transform in terms of the materials that you're using or reusing? Or
Yeah,
tell me.
to me, the transformation has been huge. And part of that is partially because of my age, I'll admit that. But back in the day when the conversation started about what's your recycled content to where we've come now over 25 years, that's tremendous.
Dull moment around here.
Yeah, it's definitely been a bell curve up. We got smarter and we were able to build on it and then look at not just where the material came from, but what was in it and the toxicity that was in it or not in it,
Mm-hmm.
and then how we could return it back to the earth. All these things kind of unfolded. And that's been really great to watch. It's now a very, very deep field where before the level of knowledge was just superficial. Now we're able to get into real conversations with manufacturers and the chemists that work there to understand how a product might be influenced by the chemistry and its durability, because that is part of sustainability as well. And the entire industry is just taking off and getting super deep. I really like it. And now, as Drew mentioned, we're now looking down the supply chain to a level that we'd only look down one level in the supply chain. Now we're looking down 3, 4, 5 to figure out how the people who mine the material out of the ground are being treated. Is it fair and equitable? Are there practices taking the waste from their mining and putting it in the local stream and poisoning water downstream? We're asking much better questions now.
Yeah. One of the things, Richard, that we like to think about with regard to sustainability is the concept of stacked benefits. And, so we're not looking at just one benefit of something. We're looking at like, how can you pile up a bunch of different things? And, I think that, so Scott and I and one of our other colleagues, we had an opportunity this past year to participate in a really interesting event. It was a circularity hackathon with Metropolis, where we were working with people all over the country and some people overseas to kind of tackle this huge question of circularity. And that's where I think we really get this topic of stacked benefits emerging, right? When we can hit things that are, ecological benefit, that are cultural benefit, that are economic benefit. And I think that the real opportunity that we're looking at right now is this kind of movement towards more circularity in the built environment. And that's everything from buildings to products, right? And, there's it's kind of like the fortunate, unfortunate reality is that whenever there's, economic pressure put into a system, there's some innovation that gets spurred out of it. And so, I think that we're kind of looking right now with a lot of curiosity and optimism around this topic of circularity, that the business case for it is going to continue to improve and that we can really think about the material supply chain in a different way, in a fundamentally different way, which is very exciting.
You mentioned mining, and I've gotten to learn so many more terms around circularity, and urban mining being one of those, just literally pulling it, you say, out of the ground. It's out of our trash pile and finding literal gold out of that. So it's pretty amazing how much how wasteful, it's shockingly amazing how wasteful our built environment has been and how useful those materials still are. And how,
It's ironic. You
but,
can't really see that, but the desk we're on was pulled out of a building. The desk, the wood rafters were pulled out of a building that was 100 years old. It had collapsed under a snowstorm. We've got steel that was welded by our people here in the office, all repurposed.
mm-hmm.
And you're right. A lot of our materials are right in front of us. We just need to think differently on what extraction means.
I'm going to take our conversation in a bit of a different direction. You've just pointed to something that I'd like to touch on is the power of storytelling when it comes to our environment, the materials around it, what it is when it is finished, what it is when it is unfinished. And tell me where storytelling has been a useful tool on your workbench.
Okay, I'm gonna take that one. I think one of the greatest tools we have in this movement is through advocacy and storytelling to be able to motivate our clients and our stakeholders involved in a project to understand what good is for them. That it's not just making an energy efficient building, that what good is making a building that makes more of its energy than it consumes and then gives some to its neighbor. You don't get that through just saying this project should be net zero energy or this project should be. You have to meet people where they are, and the story of and the trajectory of that is to have them slowly learn a little bit and a little bit more, and then accelerate it to the point where they are the advocates for the project. They are the ones going, we've got to get to past net zero. We've got to get to positive. And we have to live off the water from the roof because I don't want that water overflowing into my neighbors and then into their stream. We have to look at toxicity because I'm going to be in that building. And I don't want that toxic stuff in my environment. So through the storytelling and the advocacy, we can get a really good building where there's full buy-in by the client, by the community, by other stakeholders.
I think that too often people's relationships to buildings are transactional, and the built environment as a whole. It's something that they move through, or it's a place where they go to do something else and then they leave.
Performs a
I
function.
think that, right, to perform a function, even if they were there for a long time, right, it's still kind of a transactional relationship. And I think to your point about storytelling, Richard, the ability for people to actually connect with the built environment in a meaningful way kind of engages them in it in a different way. So you're not just passing through it, you're with it. You're passing with it. And when you kind of have that mentality, you are more engaged. You tell people about it, you're excited about it. I mean, one of our favorite things is when we start to see our clients become the champions of their buildings. And there's nothing that makes us happier than we get a YouTube video sent to us from our client about them giving a tour to a bunch of high school students, just talking about the building and about biophilic design. And like when we see our clients using this language and telling those stories and sharing it with other people who then changes their perception and understanding of the built environment, that's that kind of, storytelling history that humans have that builds engagement and honestly it builds care for the built environment. And until people have that moment where it clicks that I am a steward of this, that I'm not just someone who passes through it, I think that that's the best that we can hope for with our buildings.
And that affects other people's lives in it. Like
Yeah.
one of my better experiences was having a CEO of a German manufacturing company call us up after we designed a manufacturing plant for them, and he was doing his yearly review of staff. And one of the employees comes in and puts his hands back and puts his feet up on the CEO's desk and says to him, I don't care what you pay me. This is the nicest building I've ever worked in, and I'm not going anywhere else. And that CEO was like, wow, that's pretty good. He paid him well anyway. But still, it was like understanding the effect that we have on people's lives when we really do our responsible good job. That's rewarding and impactful.
All right. Well, I'm going to take us to the next step out of storytelling. And I formerly registered buildings for one of your high performance standards. And I would like to tell folks that you're going to have a beautiful building. You're going to have an equitable building. You're going to have a high performing building, and you should. And I don't care. What I want to know is, where did you almost not make this? Where did this almost come off the rails? Where were things so far gone that you didn't know that it would actually get over the line? And then what happened?
Which time?
I'm sure there are many. I mean, challenge is right there in the word.
I mean, I would say every project has that moment. I think that, I don't know that obviously anyone who's like gone through the process of making a building understands this, but for people who haven't, it's maybe not so apparent. Every project is hard, and every project faces pretty serious headwinds. There is usually a moment in every project of like, is this going to happen, or is this dead? Right? I don't think that's an unusual situation to have, and I think it speaks to the complexity of trying to do something hard in the first place, right? If we were doing, an easy building, right, you don't get those same sort of headwinds. But when you're trying to do something different, it's always a challenge, right? Because it's the fundamental nature of it.
I remember sitting down with a code official once and showing him a set of drawings, and literally he laughed, rolled it back up, passed it back, and said, "Haha, this is funny." Drawings. And the reason was, we were making a building out of straw bale, and it was a commercial project. And he was like, "No, you're kidding me, right?" So, we worked through that. Unfortunately, some people lost their jobs over it because they stood in the way of providing an economic resource for farmers, which is part of what we were trying to do on the project. But you work through it. We had to, for that building, we had to prove to the code official, even though we didn't need a fire rating, we had to prove to him that we had a 1-hour fire rating. So the client spent $26,000 extra to build the assembly and then fire test it.
And then set it on fire.
Yeah. And he didn't have enough money to do the fire test for 3 hours. He only had enough money for 1 hour. It would have made it through all 3. But now it's an approved 1-hour assembly. So anytime you're pushing the envelope and trying something hard and new, you're going to run into difficulty and you're going to fail. There's going to be failure. And so the philosophy that we apply is, we try until we fail, and then we try again. We learn from that failure as quickly as we can, and we try again. Sometimes we fail a second time, but most of the time what we've realized is, because of the first failure, we've learned enough that we can be successful the second time. It's hard work, but it's good work.
I think that there's another element to all of this, which is, I think that a lot of times, certainly in my experience, and I think in Scott's experience too, architectural education kind of builds you up as a designer to say, this is the idea, and anything else is not going to work, right? That it has to stand this way. It has to be like this. And I think that what we've encountered on projects is more that it's about the process. And there is this, as you go through an integrated process, things inherently change. And those obstacles make the projects better. And so every time the project feels tenuous, it feels tenuous for a reason. And you've got to kind of be sensitive to that. And if it's not feeling right, then you got to design your way out of that, right? And every time you encounter something like that, in our experience, we use it as an opportunity to make the project better. And part of that is having an openness to the many, many aspects of context that go into what a building project has to be. It's not just what we might see it initially the first day we start drawing, right? There's so many layers and so many things that we have to work through. And it is everything from how does it work aesthetically? How does it work functionally? What is the life cycle of our materials? Do they return to the earth? How do we protect against fire? How do we protect against safety? How do we engage the people who are going to be here? And all those things add richness to the built environment. And ultimately that's what we're trying to do here. It's not a single solution. And so, the question of like, when does it feel like it's going to all fall apart? All the time, right? But that's the job. It's our job to kind of like sense that and respond. That's the process of what it takes to make something special, that makes something meaningful.
If we didn't get that feeling, I think we wouldn't be pushing hard
Right.
enough.
I am not an architect, nor am I an engineer, and I'm really curious about, you mentioned benefit stacking here. And can you give me another example or help me understand how you not just do a code compliant building or to reach a certification, but how you really look at benefit stacking through the lens of a net positive or like maximizing point of view, abundance point of view?
Sure. I think that one of the ways that I would say the very first way we start to look at this is with the program of a project, right? Because usually when a potential client says, comes up with their program for a building project, it's not stacked.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the opposite, right? It's
Right.
kind of like, I need one of these, I need one of these, I need one of these, I need three of these, right? And, I think the first way that we look to do this benefit stacking is to say, like, how can we take those things and kind of overlap them, literally stack them, right? Because if we continue to design buildings where, you know, every piece of the program represents square footage that just gets stacked and stacked and stacked and stacked until you have this very large building that you're using for all these disparate things one at a time, as opposed to having a building that you can use continuously for more time and use every square foot for more things, right? That is one of the most sustainable things that we can do in a project, right?
Yeah.
We build less square footage, we use it more, we engage people with it more, and it enlivens the space. It reduces our operating costs, reduces our embodied carbon. So that's kind of like our earliest, way that we think about it.
And if you just need like, a basic example to look at stacked benefits, we might, on a project on the south side of a building where you need a canopy, put solar panels. So now I'm generating my energy and I'm keeping the water off my head. But we did this for Mount Cuba, which is, how do you describe Mount Cuba?
They're a horticultural research institution. They do amazing work.
Right. Restoring plants, essentially.
Yep.
So for them, you're also attracting people to the building. You're educating them. You're keeping water off their head, and you're creating the energy you need for the building. Same thing for Muhlenberg College. We did a beautiful passive house, LBC, and LEED project for them. And if we can put the solar panels in a place that actually attracts students because they can see them as they walk into the building, then there's a huge stacked benefit there. You get 3 more students a year and you pay the carrying cost of the building. So beautiful stacked benefit.
And it kind of points to some visual storytelling too, because it adds some beauty and intrigue, I would imagine. I'm just thinking of how you can design with nature in mind. You can use some patterns and shadow and shape with your awning there.
Yeah.
You've given me actually some other questions about scalability. You've mentioned a single project, a collection of buildings that stand alone, a collection of buildings that work together. Can you give me some ideas about scalability and how this moves up through the community level, through city? Give me some ideas how this scales upwards.
All right. So we learned quite a long time ago that projects by themselves shouldn't necessarily be net positive energy or net positive water or standalone. Everything in nature cooperates, and our buildings should too. We were working on 2 buildings in the DC area, Washington, DC area, and one of them was on a north-facing slope.
Okay.
And we were trying to get to be net zero energy, and it's in the woods.
In the dark.
Okay. It's in the forest. Right. This institution hired us to deliver a net zero energy building. And we're like 3 or 4 days into a charrette. We got 50 people there, great event. But I got to the point where it's like, oh my God, we are so set up for failure. Except we were also working on another building 500 feet away
Okay.
in a field of grass.
Gets
And
sunlight
so
all
we
day long.
realized that the grass building needed to generate all of the energy, not just for itself, but its neighbor, moss. And the moss building on the north hillside had to open up its arms and capture all the water, purify it, make it drinkable, use it in both buildings, and then return it to nature. Those two things collaborated. And now we look at every project of how do we collaborate with our neighbors? What do we do to make everybody better, not just our one project? And that can go from anything from water or energy to bicycle storage and showers to social programs. The more that we can share, the more that we can help each other, either in our social setting or a building environment, the better we'll all be. And that's part of our goal.
Yeah. This actually makes me think about an article I read the other day that it was about architectural photography and how architectural photography is in the process of undergoing a potentially very significant change because the way we've historically photographed architecture is horizontally, right, in a landscape. But as we look more and more at imagery vertically on our portable devices, it's
Interesting.
challenging this, right? And so there is a more of a movement towards verticality, right? Or square images. And one of the challenges of this is that we're losing context because in a horizontal view of architecture, you can see context, right? You can look at what's beside your building, what's next to it. And when we shift to a vertical view, we start to lose that because we start to have more isolated views of our architecture. And the real, and as I was reading this, what was and I appreciated the way that this article was written because it kind of looked at this kind of what is the impact of this and how we start to see the world. Are we missing the context, right? Are we cropping it out because we're not focused on it? And I think the key thing from us that we've learned about sustainability is it has to be contextual, right? You cannot isolate it. And that for it to be most impactful and most effective, you need to understand what you're part of, what your ecosystem is, what your community is, what your physical environment is, what your social environment is. And that's the kind of thing that I think is just really something that in this movement, we can't disregard it. We can't just look down at the immediate thing that we're doing. We have to be looking around.
That's really the only way we're going to get to a more regenerative place
Mhm.
is looking that way. Perhaps true, just because I was thinking about it, as we begin to look at things in this relationship, designers begin to look at the sky and the earth better.
Yeah.
We'll see if they begin to think about those things. But it is an interesting time in photography, and also that's going to influence the way, unfortunately, some designers.
Well, sure. I mean, I think it changes the way we think. If everything we see is without context, it's going to limit our, pattern recognition on a day-to-day basis.
Or fits in that Instagrammable moment frame. Yeah, this is really blowing my mind. I had never considered physiologically, humans, we have a near 180-degree field of view through both eyes and maybe some a little wider, but the field of view from these devices and then the verticality, I didn't even think about that, of how everything is now in a scroll form or square format, and these don't have nearly the field of view, or at least in some of the lenses, and how that's changing design and buildings is for those moments captured on a cell phone.
We've experienced, Richard, because of our age, we've experienced everything in this context. And
Right.
so how is it going to change the youngest generation? How are they going to look at things differently? They're already so affected by the impact of that device they carry with them all the time, as we are too. We're going to have to see how it changes things for them. I am, though, super hopeful of the next generation of designers because I think that their focus has changed Their ability to understand their technical depth is changing because of experience. And I do see them focusing a lot deeper than others on regenerative practices. And that gives me a lot of hope. It's up to them now. So for your listeners, it's up to you guys. And so we're counting on you. We're counting on them to push this movement forward.
So this is really interesting though, because we were talking about this just the other day, and one of the things that we have witnessed, which is really interesting, and Richard, this is swinging all the way back to the start of this conversation. You're asking us kind of like, how did we get to sustainability? How did we get to this kind of drive in our careers? One of the things that's really, to Scott's point about being optimistic about our younger generations right now, is that whereas we had to go on personal missions to find sustainability for ourselves, it's not always the case now. And so, we meet with lots of young people all the time, whether we're out talking in the community or if we're doing recruitment for the firm. And so many people right now, it's like, this is just what they studied in school, right? This was what they learned in design school. Right? Sustainability is now part of things. It's not something that you have to find as much. And so, whereas, we kind of came to sustainability, Scott and I individually, through this kind of a personal place, we have a lot of people who are coming to it from their training first. And I think that the key thing on that is to figure out, that's great because it really casts a broader net and it brings more people into this movement. But then once they're in the movement, I think we need to find a way to provide them connections in that personal way. And so, it's like we've talked to people and interviewed them, and it's like they went through school, they learned about sustainability, they did it in their design studio, they went to, pursue a minor in it, but they don't really like nature.
Yeah.
Right. But they know that this is what they're supposed to do, right? Because it's a value set that's been kind of instilled, but it's a set of external values, maybe more than an internally driven value. And I think that if we're really going to create champions in this movement, we need to find a way to create that kind of internal drive also by getting more one-to-one connection with nature, with communities. That's what's really going to propel people to do this.
I'm hoping that that is the new role of the local green building councils, to be able to create that connection between the next generations and bring them together, deepen their knowledge, give them meaning and purpose. And as you were saying, make it something that's internally motivated, not externally motivated. And then we'll get another generation of wonderful champions that'll push this movement further than you and I even thought it could be.
That's what got me Cascadia Green Building Council till I die. Okay, guys, this actually takes us perfectly into our next segment. Have you ever done the rose, thorn, bud conversation framework before?
Tell us more.
So a rose is something that's currently awesome, blossoming in your world these days. A thorn is a prickly problem that you're having, draws blood to the fingertips. And a bud is hope for the future. So tell me, what's really particularly fragrant in your garden these days?
Oh, I like
Spring
that.
has sprung.
Good. Right now, Alan, it's mushroom compost. I just put it down last week.
I just started my worm bin. So.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for us, what's really fragrant is, we have a legacy of great projects, right? That of where we have continued to push ourselves and our clients into new challenging dimensions. And I think that is the thing that has enabled us to kind of build our culture and impact change and see people change in the process. So, I think that it's something that personally I'm very grateful for, to have been able to work on projects like this with amazing people who want to do amazing things for the world, and play a role in that.
I think there's two parts of that, though. There's those leadership projects that we get because they're coming to us because of what we do. But I don't think that we as a firm ever forget the service projects. Like we're in this business. I don't want to say business. We're in this profession to serve people. And so we take on plenty of projects that it's someone's just coming to us and saying, I need this.
I need help.
I need
I need
help.
help.
Yeah.
And so we take those on just as much as we take those real deep leadership projects. You got to find that right balance. I mean, we're here in this profession to serve people. I'm not here to serve myself, serve them.
Yeah, I actually think it's to the point of this, I think it is that fragrant rose when you can get to the point of realizing that the work you do actually changes things for people,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of what it looks like, how sexy it is, whether or not it's going to be on the cover of magazines, right? If you can find equal value in the work that impacts communities or people in need, that's a really important thing, really
Yeah.
important part of why we get up every day and do this.
What's thorn? What's stuck you?
Yeah.
I think that the thorniness of what we do is very much still rooted in the really significant upheaval we've had in all aspects of our lives over the last 5 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
We just crossed the 5 year mark since the start of the pandemic. And even though, we're beyond a lot of it, Scott and I are sitting here having a conversation this close to each other. We wouldn't have dreamed about this a few
Right.
years ago, right? And so while we've made it past a lot of it, there are still things that have changed so drastically and so
Mm-hmm.
significantly over the last 5 years in almost every aspect of our lives. And I think that, while we feel normal in the moment, if we reflect on where we are, there's still a lot that's changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so
There's
much that's
scars.
changed, and there are scars, and there are things that may never go back to the way they were. Um,
Along that point, like one of the things that's a little bit of a thorn to me is I watched a generation of very young architects lose mentorship because they weren't in the office. And we have to kind of rectify that now and give them extra support and help them along so we all stay healthy. It's been difficult, and there's some social unrest that's come from it, a lot of transition in our profession and a lot of other professions. Everybody's kind of
but I will say, getting into the bud aspect of this, I've always kind of reflected on the whole concept of Scott's phone making noises in the middle of a recording. Okay, I've always reflected on the concept of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? And I think that, our lives we were going about things a particular way. And then when the pandemic hit, that was the antithesis, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was the thing that kind of swung us in an extreme other direction. And where we are now is we're in this synthesis stage. And that's when really exciting things happen. And so, I think that we're starting to see the potential of all of this. And, for me, that potential in every aspect of the way we do things that's different from how we've always done it before is what gives me that excitement and optimism that we can do this. We can do this thing that we've set out to do, this mission that we're on, this movement that we're a part of. So yeah, I mean, I think that that's the bud here is
Mm-hmm.
that we now have this kind of, in some ways we've been a little bit liberated by the way that we were before the pandemic in terms of how we got smacked by it. And it's like now we're in a different place and we're charting a new course, and that's exciting.
and with that new course, we can then design a process that has a better end result. Process has changed.
And continue learn building on the lessons you've learned. You've given plenty of examples here how you failed the first time, but you learned immense amount from that. So Scott actually teed me up for this next question here in the garden, and it's around gardeners. Tell me who have been some of your mentors along the way who have helped to light your path, and then the other side of that, who are you helping to grow?
I mean, I've in my career, I've found mentors in every corner of it,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's somebody who I sit next to, or, somebody who's very senior to me, who's teaching me something, or somebody who's really young who I'm working with, who's showing me something I've never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I'm personally, with regard to mentorship, I'm looking at everyone around me to understand both, like, what can I learn from them, and how can I contribute too? We very much here at Revision try to nurture a culture of circular mentorship as opposed to a top-down one. And so it's just, I think it's just part of the way that we are. I think part of being an effective mentor or mentee is having an open mind and recognizing like that you're not perfect, and that you're still on a process of development. And it's one of the best parts, number one, of being an architect, and number two, being in sustainability, is like, this is stuff that I'm going to keep learning my entire life. I've been on this journey and I'm continuing on this journey, and things are always changing regardless of whether you've been a practitioner for 50 years or you just graduated from college, right? And so, personally, I think seeking that no matter where you are is the key. I would say, but who I am mentoring, I would say my most important job in terms of mentorship are my children, and that's one that I'm working on every day. And the same thing. It's like I'm learning from them too. I'm learning about all the things that I shouldn't be saying as a parent. That make them cringe. So, but I think that it's part of it. I like to think that if we can continue to look at the world and the people around us with open minds and with kindness, and choose that instead of participating in the ugliness of the world, then we're doing our jobs.
Yeah. I want to relate something back to kids. One of the most beautiful moments I've had in the last couple of months was having my 15-year-old join me at a green building conference.
Wow.
And yeah, and it was out on the floor, trade show floor. And he was only there for like half an hour, but he walked around and I let him, go his own way. And the questions that he asked the people on the trade show floor were so beautiful. And to have him go to a manufacturer and ask about, what's in their product and the carbon equation and the toxicity and all these different questions, and say it with such elegance, just shook me. And so, yeah, mentoring our children are super important, but equally important is the mentoring the people that we do here. And it's bi-directional. Like, I think that our collaborators here are probably really sick of hearing me say, teach me and put it on a PowerPoint slide, because that's what they're doing. Like, they are teaching us about deeper aspects of sustainability. And then I make them put it on a PowerPoint slide, and we bring it to the all staff meeting, and then we teach everybody in the firm. And then they take that, like any good trim tab, and they bring it to all their projects and all the people that touch their projects. So the people is just one of those stacks benefits of what we try to share here. So we all move together in this regenerative movement.
My only addition to that is make it ELI5. Explain like I'm 5. This is fantastic. Okay, so guys, last question here. We've focused a lot of our conversation around the need for nature and the need to be in nature. So what are one of your favorite places in nature?
There's a long list.
I would say, I mean, there's so many places that are favorite places, but I would say one of the most memorable spaces is when I was on vacation with my family, and we were looking for someplace to go for a hike one day. And, I'm looking on an app and it looks like, oh, there's this interesting gorge trail. Let's go try this out. And then looking at the comments on it, and was like, it's a little bit hard to get to this trail. It's not really well marked, and you kind of have to like park far away, and then you have to hop over a highway barrier to get to it. And so my kids were much younger at the time, and we're like, well, okay, let's try it anyway. And so it was this journey to get to the place where we were supposed to go, and we weren't sure, like, are we supposed to be here? Is this even supposed to be? And what we kind of,
why do we have to cross this barbed wire fence to get here?
After we hopped over the metal barrier on the side of the road, and we ended up in the most exquisite gorge trail.
Wow.
Alone, right? And to be in this just amazing place in nature by ourselves, having gone through a journey to get there as a family, like that was one of those things that kind of sticks out, because it's not what we expected. what we saw there was just remarkable.
For me, it's a different story. First, like, I think we have to understand that some people aren't aware yet about how important nature and natural connection is to them. So we have to have them understand we evolved with nature over 200,000 years. And we learned what good was. When we saw cloudy water and we drank it, it made us sick. We realized that's not good. We saw clear water and we're drawn to it. We've evolved with nature, and we are not going to be smart if we think we can live without it. Mars is not in my future under any circumstance. Okay, but some of my favorite places, I've spent about a year and a half migrating through the United States. So I've been to a lot. And it's places like the Badlands, sheep meadow or sheep plateau up in the middle of the Badlands, away from everybody. There's nobody there. The Black Hills, Grand Canyon is stellar. Parts all along the Oregon coast are just beautiful. Even parts of Nebraska, just in the middle of the farmlands, are exceptional. So my list is too long.
That's okay.
But what's
I think
most
those are good ones.
important is be in it,
Yeah.
not just for a moment. Spend some time, turn the phone off, leave the car behind,
Widen
and
your view.
experience.
Yeah.
Right. And then you realize how nice that connection is and how much better we feel when we are in nature on a daily basis.
Yeah. I think that there's something about, I always find that hits me is like when I'm not necessarily looking for it and I find it. It's like I've had moments where, where I've literally just been driving somewhere and I've stopped my car and got out. Right. Because it's like all
just
of a
a
sudden
moment of nature.
you're like recognize it. You're like, okay, I'm somewhere special now, and it's worth this diversion to have that experience to remind me that like this is what I'm a part of and this is what matters. So, I think that for me, those most special places in nature are the ones that are unexpected in their impact to me, because it's like sometimes you go in pursuit of nature and that's great too, right? But it's when you're not in pursuit of nature and you find it that I think is when, for me, it's the like the most jarring realization of how exquisite it is and how important it is.
It's like accidental awe. You just like stumble upon magnificence.
Yeah.
Wow, this is fantastic. This has been a really good conversation. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. We've talked about challenges. We've talked about materials. We've talked about a lot about nature. We've talked a lot about togetherness. And I think thematically that's really important. The togetherness is important. You've given me examples here of how we interact with our environment, the built and otherwise, and how important that experience is to us in our everyday lives, whether it's visible or invisible. I really appreciate your conversation around mentorship and that it's a two-way street. I'm happy to hear that you're perpetual students of this craft and advocates. I think advocacy is a real important element in this conversation because we're not doing it for ourselves. And in fact, what I'm learning more and more is I won't be here long enough to see some of this great stuff happen. And to hear that you're continuing on this work is really fantastic and fulfilling. I hope that you feel fulfilled by the success from your challenges. You have lots to be excited for. Go ahead.
Thank you for having us on this podcast. I hope you keep up the conversation with many people in the field so I can learn from them as well.
I appreciate it. And Drew and Scott, thank you for joining me here. And I think that you're yet another example that big changes start small.
Yeah.
And I hope you join me back here on another episode.
Absolutely.
Be happy to.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks for joining me.
All right.